Welcome, everybody. We're just letting a few people in, so just be a moment before we start. But definitely welcome to everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Really happy to have Raul participating in our session. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping elements. Most people have been on Zoom, but in case you're looking for just some pieces on it, you can change the view of how you're seeing everybody on screen in the top right. You can change it from speaker view to gallery view, depending on your preference. And then in the bottom middle is an opportunity to chat. If you have any questions throughout, this is an open dialogue. So feel free to drop questions into the chat. Happy to pick those up as we go. And I've had some fantastic questions in advance from you. So definitely a lot of content to cover. And as well, want to do a bit of a promotion. Our next virtual coffee chat is coming up on March 24th. And we've got Nick Lawson from Squad and Amir from Zoom joining us to talk about digital sponsorship and digital activation. So we'll send over a link to that registration in the follow-up to today's call. But would love to welcome Raul to the conversation today, talking about the Toronto Arrows and being a new professional sports team in Toronto, the challenges of setting up as a new team in the competitive space that is Toronto for sports, and then the impact that COVID's had on the team last year with the cancellation of the season, and this year with a relocation down into the US for the start of the league. But let me give you a bit of background on Raul. He's been focused on building strategic, mutual, beneficial relationships in corporate, community, and government partners across the country. He's always looking for opportunities to work with partners to build creative marketing initiatives with the goals of driving organizational priorities and growing overall brand awareness. Prior to joining the Arrows, Raul spent 7 years in customer loyalty sector, most recently working with major Canadian brands, and mainly focused in the financial services payments industry in his role as Associate Director of Strategy with Air Miles reward program Loyalty One. And as well, Raul was just detailing some of his experience in sports and representing Canada on the national stage. So pretty excited to hear about that. And sort of pumped you up. Raul, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I'm super happy to be chatting today. I think it's great to share some of the progress we've had at the Arrows, and we're really looking forward to our 2021 season kicking off in just a couple of weeks on March 20th. But yeah, I guess a quick intro on me. So my role at the Arrows is the Director of Partnerships. So as you kind of mentioned in my bio, responsible for all things corporate partnerships, community partnerships, everything in the sponsorship realm. My background, as you mentioned, is actually in customer loyalty. So out of university, when I graduated in 2013 from Western, I joined Air Miles and worked in a number of roles, from marketing to strategy to partnership relationship with brands like Bank of Montreal, American Express, Samsung, Wealthsimple, to name a few. But my passion has always been in sports. So when the opportunity came up to join the Arrows in sort of a partnership role, kind of marrying some of my skills that I learned at Air Miles and with my passion. As you mentioned, sports has been a big part of my life. So I represented Canada playing cricket at various age group levels. So kind of a thrill to always represent your country on sort of a national stage. But yeah, really enjoying the transition, and now spending almost a year at the Arrows. I mean, as you kind of mentioned, in this COVID environment, not only working for an emerging team, it's definitely presents a set of challenges inherently, but when you layer on a global pandemic, it has all forced us to be very creative, very entrepreneurial in how we go about our respective functions here at the Arrows. But with all that said, we're really excited to kick off in a couple of weeks, and really looking forward to chatting through some of the momentum we've gained in advance of our kickoff in a couple of weeks.
Fantastic. And you've sent across a link just to give everybody a sense of who the Arrows are. So let me share that with everybody and give a quick view of the Toronto Arrows.
Toronto Arrows from Canada. Fantastic. We're in for a blockbuster finish here.
By far the hottest team in the league,
the Toronto Arrows.
Yeah, so just a quick intro. I mean, I know from my end, I got into rugby when I was living in Australia, so got introduced to that, and so continuing to play. But really enjoyed the sport. It wasn't something I had been involved in prior to moving to Australia, and then with the Wolfpack coming to Toronto, and now the Arrows, my kids are pretty young, and they've become really into the sport to the point that they've actually joined a team and rooked me into becoming a coach. So now I'm coaching U10s and really getting into understanding the culture for rugby, and it's been fantastic to watch. I guess from your experience, working at a really large organization like Loyalty One and Air Miles, moving to the Toronto Arrows, how's that experience been?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been pretty fascinating, pretty interesting. I mean, moving from a pretty big organization with over 1,000 employees to a team that I think we now stand at 10 people on the commercial side is definitely very interesting. I think that the key difference has probably been when I think about marketing and sales and partner engagement, is moving from something that is a pretty proven commodity in customer loyalty. You think about the Air Miles reward program, I think everybody in Canada has at least heard of it, to sort of a new and up and comer in professional rugby. I think that has been sort of a big difference in terms of when you're in a boardroom, you're talking about the value of something, going from, again, a proven sort of business model that's been around for 25 plus years to this sort of brand new kind of new participant on the scene in the sports landscape in Toronto. That's definitely been the biggest, I'd say, adjustment. I would say otherwise, just from a working perspective, again, moving from such a big organization to very much a startup environment. I think at the Arrows, we're very fortunate with Bill Webb, our owner, that he trusts us to look at new opportunities, to be entrepreneurial. So in many ways, there's a lot of freedom in terms of how we want to advance our sort of mandate. So if it's me on this partnership side, if it's Neil McDougall on the ticketing side, we kind of have the freedom to explore different opportunities and you bring it back to the leadership group at the Arrows to say, hey, this is what I think is going to be a really, really good idea, and we move pretty quickly. And if we collectively judge something that's going to drive value for the Arrows, we move a lot faster. So just changing from a big big company to sort of a startup environment, definitely enjoying the transition, but very different environments.
And I know you joined at a pretty interesting time. I think looking at your LinkedIn, you probably joined just before everything shut down, and then all of a sudden you've got this new scenario of dealing with partnerships in a league shut down, and now in a relocated space. How's that affected you?
Yeah, I mean, if I can, go through the timeline. So early last year, so I had just come back from my honeymoon with my wife in ironically South Africa, who had just won the Rugby World Cup in 2019. Within a couple of months, I started working for the Arrows, and there was a lot of momentum. And so just to give a little bit of background on how our season works in sort of a normal world, I guess whatever that sort of looks like now, is the Arrows generally start their season at the beginning of February. Of course, in Canada in February, it's snowing, which is not really conducive to playing rugby. So generally, the Arrows go out and play all or most of their away games sort of on the trot, and then return back to Toronto in April to play their home games. So last year, we had started on the road. We had won 4 games, only lost 1 at the top of the conference. All the stats were pointing to us to being one of the top teams in the league. On top of that, we were really looking forward to getting back to Toronto to have one of our first home games since almost been a year since our fans had seen us live. And at that point, that's when the season and the COVID pandemic really started to become to interfere into all of our lives. And, within a couple of weeks, we, found out the season was on hold. That went to the season being canceled. And ever since then, I think, what we've been trying to do is, when everything, sort of canceled, and we were put on hold for a second, for lack of better words, we spent the first 4 to 6 months really looking at sort of the foundations from the commercial side, because we knew that this was going to be, a long-term thing. It's going to be a while before we play rugby. So, what we did was we spent the first few months really looking at, what kind of customer research do we need? What CRM system do we need? From an event perspective, what are those types of technologies that are going to become sort of mainstream in this new sort of COVID environment? So we did a lot of, sort of background and foundational work to really set us up well. But I would say, come, late summer, fall, we knew that we'd be back playing again in 2021. So our focus really shifted again on talking to partners. And I think that was really helped out by us doing a lot of the background work and understanding who our fans were. We did a lot of research work with a group called Forefront from Chicago to really learn from demographics, psychographics, behavioral attitude, perspective, who our fans were, what those sort of gaps were and opportunity groups that we could tap into to grow our following. And that was really handy in having conversations with partners who were, unfamiliar with us or just getting to know us. And then using, the last 6 months to really talk to a lot of partners, come to partnership agreement deals, which we're really happy about, in advance of the season. But then again, the unknown part was because we are the only Canadian team in Major League Rugby, and maybe we can talk about, Major League Rugby and, what that looks like, just to give everyone some context. But with the border, as you can see with the Toronto Raptors, the Blue Jays, TFC, that created a whole bunch of uncertainty, looking forward to 2021. And where we've landed now is, similarly to a few of the other Toronto franchises, is that, we're going to go down to Atlanta, for however long we need to be there, play our home games out of Atlanta, travel, to the other cities in the States to play our away games. And I guess, since we've, come to that decision and we announced it just recently, last few weeks ago, we've been trying to do a lot of planning around what that actually looks like from, not only the players going down there from a health and safety perspective, but what does that look like from a fan engagement perspective? What does that look like from a sponsorship perspective? What does the environment look like on broadcasts? Are we going to be trying to sell tickets? All those questions creates a ton of, sort of uncertainty. But again, we've been sort of in this world for over 12 months now. Our team has gotten really used to working in this sort of uncertain climate. So I think in many ways we were well prepped for it. And even though some of those decisions are sort of being made, on the fly and in real time, I think we've set ourselves up well to have a really successful season.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting you're doing the audience, the audience work. I mean, are you focusing on people who had actually been coming to games, or are you looking at people who are interested in the sport more broadly?
So yeah, we kind of divided it into, 3 sort of, buckets. We know our core group of fans. The rugby community in Canada is very tight knit. So we have a lot of super fans who we know quite well. So we did things like small focus groups with them. Other stuff we did was we looked at our season ticket holder base. We also looked at, working with a group, Forefront, who has, some good advanced analytics tools, the following on our social media channels, to do some audience sort of evaluation and, behavioral analysis. So we looked at sort of separate groups, ranging from the diehard fan to your casual rugby fan. And we learned quite a bit. It sort of, in many ways validated what we knew, just from a fan base perspective. We knew that, our fans, potentially, skewing towards people from the British Isles, a little bit older on sort of the age range, that validated some of the things that we knew about the demographics of our fans. But the interesting things were it pointed to, were some of the big opportunities, and that namely pointed to, growing the rugby audience from a female perspective, getting younger, for example. Even learning things like there was a big overlap in people who were interested in rugby in Canada and the UFC. So these are kind of things that, we didn't know before. So not only were we able to validate sort of from a gut feeling who we thought our fan base was, but we learned a whole bunch of new stuff about, potential new pockets that we need to gain exposure to grow the game, to grow the Arrows, and to just, grow our overall fan base and followership.
And do you find you're tapping into the growth, or you're needing to drive growth for that audience fan base?
I would say that, we're always looking to grow, first and foremost. I think, with the Arrows in rugby, this is our 4th year coming up. there is sort of this core rugby, fan market in Canada. Rugby has really, really strong participation rates at the high school level, the university level, even at the clubs, and naturally it's created this, really strong sort of tight-knit core rugby followership group. So we know that, that group is, always going to support us, is going to show up to the games, watch us on TV, be interacting with us on social channels. But I think one of the key questions sort of in this off season has been, well, how do we grow outside of that market? I think what we noticed with the Toronto Raptors, for example, is they did a great job in expanding beyond the core, basketball market to your casual sports and entertainment fans. And I know a lot of that came with, winning, which, the Arrows are a winning team and we are quite strong. But now we are looking at what are some of those other groups that we need to gain exposure to, whether that's through, digital on social, whether that's a younger demographic, whether it's newcomers to Canada, whether it's people who are interested in other sports but not necessarily have been exposed to rugby. Those are all sort of fan segments or potential fan segments that we've identified, and we're putting a lot of attention, especially through some of our digital activations, through things like targeting and just content that's going to appeal to a group that's not just your core rugby base, to grow the fan base. So again, we are tapping into that general sports and entertainment market in Toronto.
And how are you approaching the partnership conversation? I guess are you tapping into people and saying, okay, this is a long-term commitment to stick with the team and grow through it, or are you finding you're having a lot of people sort of sticking their toe in the water, just figuring out whether it works for them?
Yeah, I think it's definitely on a case-by-case basis. I think everybody sort of in the sponsor world kind of knows the climate, that it's a difficult climate, with things like budgets and stuff like that, for sponsorship being sort of cut unilaterally across the board, in many different categories. I would say, to answer your question, there are a lot of organizations out there that sort of mirror themselves with us. So some of the local businesses that we're working with, they see very similar elements in what they're seeing in their business in the Arrows, in terms of having this kind of niche segment, tapping into this niche customer segment with a lot of opportunity to grow, with a loyal following at the beginning, but a great opportunity to expand into new customer bases. A lot of sort of small businesses in the Toronto area are seeing similar things in the Toronto Arrows in their businesses, and they want to get involved at the ground floor. They want to get involved right from the beginning. But that even extends to some of the larger organizations that we work with. So for everyone's context, our title sponsor is Honda Canada. In the next couple of weeks, we'll be also announcing a number of sponsorships with some good national and international brands. And sort of at their level, I think what their viewpoint is that there's a lot of potential for rugby in Canada to grow. There's a lot of potential for the Arrows to grow. Again, can we get involved from an early perspective and take advantage of all the impressions that we can get across the board, not only with the Arrows, but across the entire Canadian rugby landscape? So with the smaller organizations, they kind of see themselves being in a similar phase of their business and their growth. At the large scale organization, they see this really, really untapped opportunity to grow their brand awareness, not only with the Arrows, but again, with rugby in Canada, overall, which lends itself to different sort of conversations. But we are really focused sort of at both ends of having, potentially different conversations with different partners in different stages of their business cycle. But what we're finding overall is when we tell the story of momentum with our organization, despite all the challenges that COVID has brought on, there's a lot of buy-in to where this could look like in, the next 3 to 5 to 10 years in terms of becoming a very mainstream sport with your casual sports and entertainment fan in Toronto coming to games, watching on broadcast. There's a lot of buy-in to that story, considering the momentum that we've achieved so far. And that just lends itself to, some positive outcomes and a lot of momentum.
Yeah, and there's a question from Jim in the chat, but I think, building upon Jim's question and where you're coming from, are you're finding, trying to crack into the Toronto market, and there's so many big sports with great exposure and longevity. Are you finding you have to tap into sponsors who are connected on a global level to rugby, or on a more consistent level when it's with the MLR, or do you find it's all over the map?
Yeah, I mean it is pretty much all over the map. I think when when we did our prospecting strategy, say late summer, when we really got going on prospecting and looking for potential new partners. Local in Toronto, we looked for brands where there were just natural connections to rugby, and that can mean many things. That can mean, businesses owned by people from New Zealand, for example, where rugby is like hockey here in Canada. We looked at categories that have logical fits, like breweries and beer. I mean, it's even the most casual sports fan can understand how rugby and beer go hand in hand together. So when we looked at from a local perspective, we wanted to kind of look at different categories where there was either a personal connection or a logical fit between the two brands. From a larger organization perspective, yes, we definitely looked at businesses that have sponsored rugby in other parts of the world for sure. But I think that even if there are companies that we'd like to talk to that have dipped their toes in rugby in other parts of the world, that we think that they can do that in Canada. I think part of our sort of pitch and value proposition to some of our prospects is that we are very different from all the other stuff going on in the Toronto sports market. We would like to actually differentiate ourselves. And I think what we're trying to do that in a few ways. I think the first one would be, when we are back in Toronto and there are live events, just from an event perspective, especially coming out of COVID, when people's potential discretionary incomes aren't what they were before and there's less to sort of spend on entertainment. Well, the Arrows provide a great opportunity for $100 for a family to go to a live sporting event with professional athletes. So that's one way we sort of differentiate ourselves. I think a couple other ways that we've differentiated ourselves is this whole story about being very, very Canadian. So for context, our team is made up, over 75% of our team are Canadians. Over 10 of our players actually represented Canada at the 2019 Rugby World Cup. So in many ways, we would like to tell a story how our team is, inherently this great Canadian story of athletes coming up through the grassroots system in Canada, playing rugby together. There's been sort of a lack of a professional opportunity to play, but now there is with the Arrows. So this very, very solid Canadian story of Canadian athletes giving an opportunity to play rugby at an elite level. So that's another way we sort of like to differentiate ourselves. The third way that I think that we like to differentiate ourselves is we brand ourselves as the most accessible professional sports team in Canada. And what that means is that, again, when we get back to live events, after an Arrows game, you can come onto the pitch and chat with our players. You can come to our sponsored pubs after the game where we have our post-match socials and chat with the players and the team. I think that's sort of unrivaled in terms of, a certain culture that sort of opportunity and experience actually builds that you won't find out in other places in the Toronto sports market. So there are a number of ways we sort of try to differentiate ourselves. Again, we have different conversations with different organizations depending on where they are in their business cycle and their size. But yeah, certainly we would like to tap into that sports entertainment market in Toronto, but very much tell a different story as to what's happening at the Arrows and differentiate ourselves versus the Raptors and the Leafs and TFC and so on and so forth.
Yeah, definitely that fan accessibility. I could see why it would drive longer term fans. I mean, I think about the fact that my kids could run down and get their hat signed or their shirt signed by somebody after a match, and just watch the player participating, and all of a sudden they're engaging with them. That's a huge difference from any other sport where you're pretty much kicked out the minute the puck is taken off the ice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, the interesting thing about rugby, and, it comes down to some of the personalities that we have on our team. Rugby is an extremely value-based sport. So if you've ever watched rugby, the interesting thing, and I contrast this with like European football or soccer all the time, is there's no room for arguing with the referee, for example. There's just no room for it. It doesn't happen in the game. When the referee tells you to do something, you just do it. There are other things in terms of, after the game, the two teams often break bread with each other and have a pint together. You don't see that in other sports. A lot of times, another thing that's interesting about rugby from a values perspective, and even just how, things about, gender inequality, I think rugby is the only contact sport that is played by the same rules by both men and women. And all these things, I guess where I'm getting to is it lends itself to a certain type of personality who plays rugby. So if you ever, get the opportunity to chat with some of our players, these are really well educated, really well spoken, really compassionate guys that, and this isn't to throw shade at other sports athletes, but they are very different than, your athletes in the NFL and the NBA and the MLB. It's just a very different experience. But from a sponsorship perspective, and, even just tapping into to sort of the ethos of rugby, when we have conversations with partnerships, we bring up these same sort of opportunities and try to leverage them into, creating different sponsor activations where you can have a one-on-one chat with a rugby player that's going to look very different, again, from what that looks like with, a superstar athlete in the MLB or the NFL or whatever it is.
And how much has that played into your process? Just trying to figure out how you know, start those conversations with brands who may not be familiar with the sport and are, you know, comparing you to the 6 other teams that are out there.
Yeah, I think what we try to do is we try to, you know, really point out the unique aspects of rugby that differentiate itself from other sports. I think, you know, what's interesting, especially, you know, in this day and age, with a lot of stuff that's going on, you know, in the media, especially around, you know, just values in general, things like equality, things like inclusiveness, things like diversity. What we've noticed is that, you know, brands are increasingly valuing this, and they're trying to make it an inherent part of all their marketing, which, you know, in many times, sponsorship is a key component of sort of their marketing suite. We try to, you know, explain that, you know, a lot of, again, what's going on in the world is mirrored in rugby, and rugby has actually been, you know, emphasizing these values that are now becoming, you know, really obvious, that are important to all brands. That has always been a core part of rugby. So a lot of the times the conversation can begin there. It's really interesting because, you know, again, when I talk about the sport, you have these, you know, sort of inherent values, and we try to, you know, boost the profile of them and show them how that actually looks like on a global stage. And a lot of times we find conversations where there's a lot of alignment in terms of emphasizing and promoting these types of values. So that's definitely a way, you know, in terms of how the values of the sport naturally make its way into some of our partnership conversations that we're having.
And how do you know, looking at the different levels of partners, and you're talking about, you know, there's a lot of local community-based partners who to see you as a, you know, an opportunity to get on early and develop alongside you, and then you've got these well-heeled partners you know, like Honda who are invested in so many different sports. How do you find value that you can give that's equivalent, or do you even carve out equivalency when you're talking about where somebody could come in?
Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, at sort of the larger scale organization, I think with the Arrows, and this is a little bit of background on the organization, we have a very strong, or we make up a very strong footprint of what Canadian rugby looks like. So in many ways, when we're talking, you know, to potential sponsors sort of at the larger level, it's not only about getting involved with the Arrows, but it's about having interactions and gaining exposure from Canadian rugby, period. We've spent a lot of time, and a lot of our time spent at the commercial level is interacting with the clubs, the provincial unions, the community organizations, whether that's the Toronto Intercity Rugby Foundation that's promoting rugby in inner cities, or Iroquois Roots Rugby that's all about First Nations rugby, or the Ability Center who's all about, you know, mixed abilities rugby. We spend a lot of time making sure that we have alignment with all of the stakeholders in Canadian rugby. So again, when you talk to a sponsor who, you know, potentially has a larger budget, more room to do things on the broadcast level, put your name on the shirt, the message to them is you're not only tapping into the Arrows fan base, you're tapping into an entire sport across the country. And we are able to enable that because of the work, the time, the dedication, and the relationships we have with stakeholders across the board, you know, across the entire sport, across the entire country. So that's, you know, one of the, you know, the ways that we like to talk to sponsors and show them the value sort of at that level. Whereas, you know, some of the local businesses, I think it's all about showing a pathway and a roadmap for how they can grow alongside us. So a lot of the conversations, you know, especially in a COVID environment, when again, you know, people's marketing budgets or sponsorship budgets, or sponsorship is a completely new thing that they've never done before, is we need to be able to talk to those sponsors about showing real impact. At the end of the day, you know, they're not going to have huge marketing budgets, and whatever dollars they have, you know, are very valuable. So we need to design marketing activations that are, you know, savvy and digital from a targeting perspective, that link to their websites or their e-commerce channels to be able to show them real sales at the end of the day. So they are very different conversations. But even at a local level, I think that the key there is, you know, from the Arrows, is we recognize that we are a new property, we are a new franchise, and it makes a lot of sense to us, or for us, to be really ingrained and connected with partners on the local level. And so, you know, it really blends well into the story and the overall momentum of, you know, sort of a growing entity becoming bigger and gaining exposure in the city by virtue of having these partnerships at the local level as well.
Yeah, and thinking about, you know, what you're dealing with this year, and, you know, not being able to have fans and stands, you know, relocating to Atlanta, that you're going to be broadcast only. I can see how an engagement comes in for the likes of Honda or 1-800-GOT-JONK who can step up to that level. How do you, bring the experience to those local community ones?
Yeah, so I mean, I think in an ideal world, especially with some of the local businesses we work with in Toronto, ideally, a lot of their partnership marketing would get activated during a game. So take for a brewery, for example, and I'll kind of show how we're looking at things that we would traditionally activate in stadium, in game, and take it to, sort of a creative way and doing it, more from a digital perspective. So a brewery, for example, is going to want to activate in game in a beer garden. They're going to want people to taste their product. And that goes for a lot of different sponsors sort of in that food and beverage category. So from a local sponsorship perspective, yeah, again, traditionally, a lot of those activations would be in stadium and in game. And now, for the time being, we're going to be playing our home games in Atlanta. We've challenged ourselves at the Arrows to see how much of these types of sponsorship activations can we not necessarily replicate, but can we do in a different way in a digital environment. So for the brewery, for example, the interesting example we have is something called the Matchday Series. We actually launched this in October. And what we've been doing, and again, it's all about, okay, a key part of the Arrows experience is, going to the pub with your mates before the match, watching, having a beer in hand during the game. There's such a logical connection there. But, obviously we can't activate in stadium. So what we've been doing is this thing called the Matchday Series, where we work with a new local Ontario brewery or cidery every month, and we make an Arrows co-brand beer or cider with rugby themed packaging, with a rugby themed marketing plan, and really promote it heavily across our social channels. What we do is we promote our customers to go on the brewery's e-commerce sites, purchase their beer or cider. That obviously is delivered to them. And now, so what you have is you've got a new way to actually engage with the Arrows, despite not having this very traditional beverage experience in stadium. But you can watch your game on TV when the Arrows get back playing again on the 20th, and actually have a number of different Arrows themed beverages. So that's a way that we've been trying to replicate or get creative with something that we would traditionally have in stadium, sort of on our social channels as well. And I would say, just generally and more broadly out of that, we've been looking sort of at the end-to-end game day experience, and seeing how much we could actually do in our digital channels to keep the engagement with our fans strong. So we're looking at things like doing, a pre and post game show, for example. We're looking at doing a 50-50 draw. Those are things that, again, are really game day specific. The 50-50 draw, really specific to, in-game in stadium, but you can do those things in a digital environment. We've also beefed up a lot of our content, from a social and digital perspective, so that there are more touch points for our fans to engage with us. Again, because that in-game experience is so critical, especially for a team of our size, where people might become familiar with us by going to a game versus seeing us, in out-of-home advertising or whatever it is. We are trying to do as many things and create as many touch points as possible from an engagement perspective. Which means having a lot more video content, having a lot of content that is player accessible, which could really mean, just having a player, shoot themselves on an iPhone. We take it to some of the agencies we work with and, package it up in a professional way, and promote that across our social channels. So not only are we trying to look at, what is inherent and important from a game day perspective and look at different ways to recreate those, but also just create more content in general so that our fans have more opportunities to engage with the team, in lieu of being able to go to the stadium and seeing the players and that kind of thing.
And I think there's some elements that are probably pretty beneficial in creating that, COVID or not, because you've got your Canada's rugby team, for lack of a better term, and have you been able to build on that kind of experience that the Jays have had and the Raptors have had, that you start with a fan base that is well beyond the GTA and probably will never actually end up attending a game?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this whole strategy of creating more content is not only going to be beneficial in a COVID environment, but from a long-term perspective, especially from a sponsorship perspective, we need to be showing both new and prospective sponsors that there are many ways to engage with the Arrows. Sponsors want to get involved with us in very different ways. And so for us, by creating many different forms of content across different communication channels, whether that's through a newsletter or through video or through our social channels, and we've just got on TikTok, for example, and done quite well and got a lot of engagement there. We need to be creating and carving out opportunities for our partners. So again, I think that this is going to be a long-term strategy and not only a very COVID specific thing, but to your point about, growing the fan base more broadly, all of these sort of initiatives are only going to help this sort of, big strategic push around content to grow the fan base beyond, our core rugby market. Again, if we can generate more impressions on social and digital and use targeting capabilities to focus on groups that we traditionally haven't talked to, we would hope that the result would be more people coming under our tent and becoming a fan. So again, a lot of this strategy around growing content, replicating things that are not that are traditionally in stadium that we're doing sort of a digital capacity. We have the lens on there might actually be a lot more flexibility and potential in the digital world to grow your fan base beyond your core traditional fans. And that's something that we're really looking forward to seeing, the results of, in season when we've got a lot of marketing. But it'll be really, really interesting to see, especially in a digital environment, the types of new fans that come and begin engaging with the Arrows, despite us not actually be playing in Toronto.
And then do you find you're getting more analytics as part of this to better report back to the sponsors? I think about somebody buys a ticket and they buy 4 tickets. You don't necessarily know who's coming. You may know who actually purchased the ticket, but with the analytics of somebody coming on and following your social or engaging with you in different elements, all of a sudden you've got all these different demographic elements that you can share and then retarget for.
Yeah, the nice thing about being, the nice thing about being really, really active on social and digital is that it lends itself to more measurement, more analytics. If I take a step back, I come from a world in customer loyalty that is all about customer analytics. I come from a world where it's really, really important to talk to your partner or your sponsor or whatever it is on a weekly basis and show, here are all the things that we've done or we did in the past week. Here's how many eyeballs saw that. Here's kind of the value that we would equate it to. Here's some new opportunities that we're seeing. Having those frequent touch points with partners is something that we're really, really looking to implement throughout the 2021 season. And I think, it's critical, again, because so much of our marketing is going to be, in a digital capacity. We have the tools, we have the resources to be able to measure a lot more. And that really lends itself to really good conversations with our partners to update them on a very frequent basis on, a new demographic that might be engaging with their brand via us through some partnership marketing. Or even things just like, the cumulative number of impressions on a weekly basis. And we saw, a certain post on TikTok do really well versus, on Twitter, right? We would like to feed those analytics and insights back to our partners on a very frequent basis throughout the season so that we can continually improve our marketing. And then they become such an important part of that overall strategy. We would like to keep our partners involved on a very frequent basis so they can put their input in terms of what the partnership marketing looks like, especially in those digital channels. So yeah, I mean, being active lends itself to getting a lot more results, a lot more faster. And we plan to use those to have really, really good conversations with our partners throughout the year.
Yeah, and I guess one of the elements of being new, the new kid on the block, new organization trying to break through is you get the freedom to be a lot more creative.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that a lot of the opportunities that we've put in front of our partners are very creative. We have, in some of these categories, we've never had a partner before, right? The partners that we work with, sort of vice versa, have never worked with a rugby organization. So a lot of the time what we do is when we talk to our partners is we say, here's what we think you might be interested in. Here are our social channels. Here's the type of marketing that we like to do. We've taken a deep dive on your business. It seems like you interact, with a certain type of, customer through your social channels, and we've gathered a few insights. And we think this is what might work. But in the end, you tell us where your business is going. You tell us what the type of customer that you want to interact with. You tell us, looking at our marketing channels, sort of vice versa, with the shoe on the other foot. You tell us how you want your brand to be presented. And so that forces us to get really creative, but it lends itself to really, really great conversations where we learn a lot more about the businesses that we're talking about. And we craft some really, really interested marketing. I think throughout the 2021 season, we're going to be doing, a lot of marketing that has been influenced by our partner contacts. And they've told us, hey, we've seen this, work really well for our organization. So we'd love to do the same kind of thing with the Arrows. And the Arrows have probably not done that kind of marketing before. But really, it really lends itself to the sort of collaborative approach with our partners where we're trying to tap into what's working with what's working for them as well, and not only what we're seeing from a growth and momentum perspective. And it really lends itself to some fun conversations.
And how collaborative are you with the other MLR teams?
Yeah, I mean, we try to talk to, I talk to the to sort of my counterparts at some of the other cities. I think the interesting thing is that, you look at the US, especially in cities like Louisiana or, Atlanta or some of the cities in Texas, and it looks like a completely different world. Down there, they're able to do things like canvas businesses within, a 2-mile radius, going door to door and talking to businesses, which, we would love to do as well. But, Canada and Toronto just looks a lot different. And so it's interesting because there have been sort of, varied sort of circumstances and sort of sandbox that the teams can play in. But, I had a good chat with my counterpart, Tim, at the New England team. And New England and that whole New England region is, sort of similar to Toronto. And it's interesting because the exact same sort of challenges that he's running into, we've had experience with. So we try to keep open communication lines with all the folks, on sponsorship or ticketing or whatever it is, across all the other teams to try to learn from each other. But it's really interesting because, even though on surface level, the North American sports market, might look pretty similar, there are so many regional differences, especially in the States, when it's a state by state, kind of case in terms of capacity and what the world looks like, that I think that the sponsorship roadmap for each team probably looks a lot different depending on what region you're in.
And with the impact of COVID, do you find partners have backed off, or they're looking at things differently and kind of waiting for you to queue up the live experience, or how's that experience been?
I think that again, when we rewind to March 2020 and the months surrounding that, naturally, so with everything else going on in the world and many things just kind of coming to a halt, initially those conversations were quite quiet, and understandably talking sponsorship maybe wasn't the right thing to do at that point. But I think now, I think that sponsors who are really interested, or potential partners who are really interested in working with the Arrows, are very understanding of where we are, and they see the momentum that we've been able to gain, the ways that we are getting creative, things like beefing up our digital channels, that kind of thing. And they're understanding that, while we may not have a live component, for the first few games, or, whether that's the entire season, we'll see, there are other ways to activate, and there are other ways to do, a lot of marketing. So I think that, as I look at, from a 1,000-foot view, the sponsorship role, I think now, I wouldn't say things are getting back to normal, but I think that everybody is sort of getting used to playing by, sort of different rules and different parameters being in place. And I think that, folks on the brand side who are in charge of sponsorship and making sponsorship decisions are going to increasingly look for properties and sports teams who have committed to investing in digital capabilities, for example, have committed to, making up things, making up for a lack of in-person activations for things on digital. I think that the sense that I'm getting is, along with just marketing in general, we see it in different channels and things of e-commerce and home delivery. Like, the world in marketing is changing regardless. I think that from a sports sponsorship perspective, I'm hearing that sponsors are beginning to understand that the future of sponsorship activations and marketing and all these plans that we put in place are increasingly going to become digital. And so a lot of the sponsors that we've come on board with, that are going to be joining us, we're going to announce them in the next couple of weeks, are really excited that we're taking a quick step forward in leveraging some of these capabilities to do a lot in our digital channels, versus having the approach of, hey, our sponsorship needs to be in stadium specific. It might be challenging for you. Well, we need to revisit this conversation. So I think that the sponsors that we've been able to gain traction with really kind of understand the world, or the ways in which the world in terms of marketing and digital marketing and sports sponsorship are changing, and trying to test out things with the Arrows in the short term.
Yeah, and I think you're in an interesting position where you've got an audience that's in stadium, or in stadium when they can be, plus you've got this Canadian audience who have an interest in the team and are only ever going to see it through broadcast. So you've got some different engagement points that you need to create to have those partners get their value. Yeah,
absolutely. It really is, when we look at our the value that we drive, our marketing strategy, our partnership strategy, it definitely is a coast to coast strategy. We look to engage with businesses that where it makes sense from coast to coast and not necessarily in Toronto. So a perfect example is the match day series and the breweries that we're working with. We were going to talk to breweries out on the East Coast and the West Coast, because we know that rugby is really popular in places like Newfoundland and in BC, and say, maybe we can do a local spin on this. We are Canada's team. We may be, located in Toronto. We might be playing out of Toronto, but could we engage the same way that we are engaging with our local fans in Toronto, from a coast to coast perspective? I think that, being the only team in Canada lends itself to, a number of advantages in which we can tap into the following, across the country. And as I mentioned before, a key part of that means having ongoing, conversations and relationships with all the provincial rugby unions. It means, being able to have, conversations with Rugby Canada to understand what's on their roadmap and how we can collaborate. I think that, the neat thing, what we'll probably see is, I mentioned before, 10 of our players represented Team Canada at the Rugby World Cup. We kind of think that, come 2023, that'll probably be half the team will be Toronto Arrows. So in many ways, we can, use that to brand ourselves as this core Canadian sort of entity and wave of Canadian sports that is not only just about Toronto, but it is about growing the sport, growing the level of competition, providing opportunities to athletes coast to coast, and making sure that our marketing reflects that. So when we do our marketing, we make sure that it's not just Toronto. If we've seen something work in the local Toronto market, whether that's with a local brewery, let's try to replicate it in another part of the country so that we can talk to the rugby fans, in those cities across the country.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of NFL teams who really took advantage of some of those types of experiences. When they couldn't have fans in stands, that whole tailgating experience was something that they know their community was missing. So they invested in home gating and brought a whole bunch of partners on board when it came to beer and food, and it became this package that people could then recreate at home.
Yeah, I think it's critical. And I mean, I'm a huge football fan. I'm a Bills fan. The tailgate is so important to that experience. I didn't get it all year. I missed it. But, I commend the teams for, trying to make up and replicate different, safe, enjoyable experiences to kind of, to keep that game day experience strong. And I think that was our early realization a number of months ago that, again, while fans are at home watching us on TV, we need those things for them to engage with. So we have to be really, really active in our digital channels. If it's partnerships that are about products like beer and cider or food and beverage, we need to come up with creative ways to create, I don't know, a match day pack of food and beverage so that you are as much as possible replicating the things that are so central to those in-stadium experiences that people can take advantage of at home.
And you've talked a bit about the creation of digital and some of the tracking and reporting that you put together. Has that been a significant investment on the team's half to make that happen, or have you found it fairly easy to put together?
Yeah, I think that both from a dollars and resourcing perspective, it's more about spending the time, right? It's really about content creation, which means we need to spend a lot of time about thinking what content is actually going to be valuable. So we have dedicated status meetings every week where we talk about the types of content we want to see go live in the next 2 to 3 to 4 weeks or whatever it is. So, from a resourcing perspective, we've had to spend a lot of time, with our team to make sure that we've got a very, very strong calendar of content planned out. From a dollars perspective, yeah, I mean, there are certain things, from a digital perspective that are, going to cost money, in terms of relationships with agencies that are going to, speed up video processing, for example. Those things are going to cost dollars, but I think, both from a time and resource perspective, again, we've understood that this is such a critical part of what we need to action on for the 2021 season, that we are spending a lot of time throughout the week planning, very far and ahead, what our content calendar actually looks like. And we've invested in the tools to make that actually come to life, whether it's working, with 2 or 3 agencies that are going to help us shoot these, types of videos, or even things like spending time to make sure that our players are on board, right? I mean, one of the unique things about, going into Atlanta is, from a marketing perspective, again, we brand ourselves as the most accessible team in Canada. We need to make sure that, our fans are hearing directly from the players themselves. So that takes a lot of planning to, with the players in this very weird sort of environment in Atlanta, and trying to, remain safe and sort of bubble in the hotel or whatever it is. We've got plans to make sure that, we've got weekly videos coming from them so that, we can generate more and more content. So in many ways, I think that the key thing there is it's just a really sort of strategic frame of mind that when we look at, the 2021 season, that is top of mind, that everything that we're doing needs to be packaged up into really compelling marketing to keep that engagement with our fans strong.
Yeah, and in order to get all that alignment, everybody pointed in the same direction, do you really find that there is, has it been a challenge to get the the players on side, the coaching team on side, your marketing team on side, IT, because there's so many different elements to make all of those things successful?
I think one of the great things that I've noticed is top to bottom, throughout the Arrows organization, even with the players, they understand that there is such a huge commercial component to the success of the Arrows, and they're all bought in. They understand that being an Arrow, being a player, means committing yourself for things like a photo shoot or an interview or a Zoom call or whatever it is. So early on, throughout the pandemic, we've had calls with the entire organization to show this is the commercial roadmap. We all need to have buy-in top to bottom, whether it's on the playing side or the commercial side, so that not only we are the most successful team on the pitch, but also off the pitch as well. So our players are very flexible, very committed to helping us generate content. So again, that can be things, them filming themselves talking about how they're staying in shape, and we package that into sponsorship marketing for a physiotherapy partner, or them taking a few minutes after training to kick some rugby balls at the goalpost, and for our upcoming footwear provider that we're going to announce, just getting us access to shooting video and footage, so that it's great partnership marketing for a partner like that. So at the player level, all the way through the organization, whether that's player, staff, training, so on and so forth, we've got a lot of good alignment. I think that the other part of it is that me and my partnership partnership shoes and role, I've got to be in tune with the strength and conditioning staff, our staff, even from a nutrition perspective, because when I'm looking for sponsors, from a nutrition perspective, whether that's supplements or even for example, a butcher shop that might fit in terms of a marketing angle that's all about healthy protein and active athletes, I kind of need to know what's going on in their world so that I can figure out what partnerships actually make sense for us from a branding perspective. So, having that alignment, having those active conversations with players, staff, whether that's, rugby staff or commercial staff, we've made sure that there's strong alignment. The players know where this needs to go from a commercial perspective. And that just makes it a lot easier for us to execute on the sort of, loaded content strategy that we're looking to action for the season.
Yeah, and do you get much floating up from players saying, here's a good partner to start looking after?
Yeah, I think, the interesting thing is, even the players say, hey, through my contacts, I know this local business where the owner's really interested in rugby, and, they're happy to broker an introduction and, have a call in terms of, seeing if there's, a partnership opportunity there. But, our players, I think really, as professional athletes, and a lot of these guys are newly professional athletes. So I think that, giving them the platform to be professional rugby players, which didn't exist, a few years ago, in Toronto, I think they really enjoy that, but they also buy into the marketing element of it, the sort of player appearance element of it, and they really enjoy having partners, especially some of our bigger partners that have a lot of brand visibility. For a player, if I put myself in their shoes, I want to grow my personal sort of followership. I want to grow, if I have a roadmap of playing for Canada and so on and so forth. And so if the Arrows are bringing in, some international brands that I can align myself with, that's only going to help me from, my roadmap perspective. So I think that they understand that, and they're really excited about some of the partners that we've been able to bring in. And then we definitely lean on the players for, a lot of sort of our marketing activation, boots on the ground type of marketing that we do.
And have you seen, much of an uptick in partners as the Wolfpack wound down? The partners wanted to stay in the rugby space and have moved over to the Arrows?
Yeah, I think that, overall, our attitude at the Arrows is all about, growing rugby, keeping the sport of rugby, alive in Toronto and in Canada, and really growing. So, with some of the, the partners, coming out of the Wolfpack situation, for us, they gained a lot of value in their partnerships with the Wolfpack. We want to make sure that we support those businesses as well. Same thing goes for their fans. We want to say, hey, there is still a lot of rugby going on in Canada. Here are opportunities the way, which to engage with us. So I think that, there were sort of 2 rugby teams in Toronto. There's only going to be 1, but our attitude is that we want to support all parties involved, so that, if there are different parties in different ways getting value in terms of sponsoring, the Wolfpack or whatever it is, we've had conversations with them to say, hey, how can we, potentially replicate things that really work really well with them? And even from a fan perspective, we say, hey, come watch the Arrows. We want to, welcome you under our tent. We want to make sure that when we can have a game, you guys know about our ticket offers. You know about, where you can watch us on TV. You can have, access to content on our social channels. So it's all really about, welcoming in all parties involved across the entire rugby ecosystem, and seeing where we can create value for, whichever type of stakeholder, whether that's a partner or a fan, or whatever it is, in any way that we can.
And do you find that, I know you've been playing in 2 locations. Do you find that changes that experience for the fan experience and sponsor engagement, whether you're at York or whether you're at Lamport, or are able to keep that consistent?
I think the interesting thing about it is that what we've seen in the past is we've had a very consistent game day experience at both venues. Naturally, them being in 2 geographic locations, there's some fans who are more likely to come to a game up in York versus Liberty Village. But I think that when we look at stadiums, we're really interested in creating the best experience possible. I think that one of the key ways that we're actually going to differentiate ourselves from other teams is from a live experience perspective. And the interesting thing about trying to gain fans who aren't part of the core rugby market could be in designing a very, very exciting game day atmosphere where you come into the venue, there's a lot going on, there's great food and beverage, there is also rugby. But I think that we're looking at sort of the ancillary parts of the experience as key ways to get people in the door, versus them being hardcore rugby fans and wanting to watch the game itself. So I think that overall, regardless of the location, we've got good plans to create really, really good match day experiences, regardless of whether that location is. But in general, creating a very, very engaging entertainment experience when we can have fans back in stands and watching rugby is going to be so important for our organizational growth to tap into, the sort of, fan opportunity segments that I talked about before. And so we really look at, having a very, very strong live event that is totally different from, Scotiabank Center or the Rogers Center or whatever it is. We are really focusing on creating that when we can, so that again, different fans are going to begin to interact with the Arrows and hopefully become, lifelong fans.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for your time today. It's been, great. I love chatting about rugby. It's always one of those good things, and looking forward to the start of the season coming up later this month. Any words of wisdom you want to pass on to everybody as we wrap up?
Yeah, first off, thanks everyone for tuning in. Hopefully, this kind of grew your, interest and knowledge about the Toronto Arrows. I would just encourage everyone to, to watch us, on TV, in the next couple of weeks. Follow us on our social channels. I think that, as I mentioned before, we've got a lot of exciting things going on. We're really interested in growing our fan base. So, keep an eye out for us, follow us on our social channels. But yeah, we're really, really excited to get going in 2021. And hopefully, some of you could be, part of our fan journey for the upcoming season.
Fabulous. Yeah, and if anybody's looking to connect with Raul or myself to chat about different elements of the conversation today, Raul, with your permission, I'm going to put your email in the follow-up if anybody wants to reach out to you. And again, thank you for joining us today. I want to push our next session on March 24th with Amir from Zoomf and Nick from Squad, talking about digital sponsorship and digital engagement. So it should be a really interesting conversation. Those two people, I really admire listening to them. And again, thank you everybody for joining. And the video for this will be live tomorrow. So if you missed anything or want to share it with other people, it'll be available on the Sponsor Circle website tomorrow. And again, thanks so much for joining.